and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be discussing travel blog names, 10 things you want to think about before your name. I'll tell you the stories behind my travel blog names. And yeah, so let's just dive in. If we're meeting for the first time, my name is Stephanie Craig. I have a new haircut. It's a new season. I'm very excited to be talking about travel blogging instead of what I'm supposed to be doing, which is writing a blog post that's way overdue. So travel blog names, we're going to talk about things you want to consider. I'm going to briefly, real quick, tell you the story behind my 3 travel blogs and their names to help you kind of figure out where I'm coming from. And also, like, your travel blog name does not need to be the most interesting, most beautiful, most creative name. It needs to be something that you're going to be happy with as far as your branding goes for a while and potentially forever. So my first website when I started it 5 years ago had a different name. I'll tell you that story later. Right now it's named History Fangirl, and History Fangirl is a personal brand. So the idea is that I'm History Fangirl, and like I go from like castle to castle and historic city to historic city, UNESCO sites, and that site is it's based on me. It's a personal brand. So I used to have a podcast, and hopefully will again, called the History Fangirl podcast. And so if I go to Azerbaijan, that blog goes to Azerbaijan. If I go to Antarctica, if somebody wants to pay me to go to Antarctica, then that blog goes to Antarctica. So that blog is based on me as a person and my adventures. So that's a personal brand. I have 2 other websites that are destination niche sites. And I shared the story a little bit about these and how I became a full-time travel blogger in my last video, which I'll link to right here. But my second site is called Sophia Adventures. That is a destination niche site. Sophia is, if you didn't know, if you just thought, oh, who's that girl named Sophia? Sophia is the capital city of Bulgaria. It's also a very beautiful, lovely name for a city. It's very like Jane Austen-y, and I thought it would be like a very romantic name because we want that blog to appeal to not only women, but primarily women. A lot of our competitor blogs are like very concrete oriented, very masculine sites. So we went with a more feminine branding and feminine touch. But also, so Sofia is the capital of Bulgaria, and the tagline is travel and adventure in the heart of the Balkans. So that is a Balkan blog. And the way that we set it up from the very beginning was any country that's on the Balkan Peninsula or that's part of the Balkan Peninsula is fair game for us to write about. So like Turkey's only partially on the Balkan Peninsula, but we're covering it. And Greece has a lot of islands, but we're covering the whole country, not just the peninsula proper. So named it after the place that I live, but chose that specifically because we thought it was more romantic and more feminine than the word Balkan. But because we have Balkan in the tagline, we have a lot of articles that have Balkan, and then we still have a lot of Balkan Google authority. My most recent blog that I started in February, at the end of February, is called Oklahoma Wonders. And that name, so Sophia Adventures, very clearly a travel blog, right? Very clearly adventure, signals, travel. Oklahoma Wonders could be like wonders of the ancient world, wonders of Oklahoma. So it could be travel, but it could also just be lifestyle, because wonders could be like children, and wonders could be just like cool things, you know? So Oklahoma, obviously I'm moving back. So I told this story to you about like, I'm moving back to Oklahoma, hopefully before the end of this year, knock on wood. So I'm supposed to be moving back before the end of the year if the visa process for my fiance, it's been stalled because of COVID. So we're going to be exploring Oklahoma, but also I set it up so that like from the very beginning, it's Oklahoma, it's the states around Oklahoma, and it's Route 66. And I did that because it's not only like Sophia Adventures is very clearly like for Americans, Brits, and Canadians who are, and anybody who's coming there, and it's about travel there, and we're Americans and we don't claim our authority on that website based on like being Bulgarians or anything, because we're not. Whereas Oklahoma, it's like, okay, that website is more set up for people from Oklahoma and the things that they like and do. And if somebody on Google finds the article on like the best things to see in a place, you know, in like in Arkansas or something, then that's fine. Like, but as far as like the social media branding goes, it's the social media pages, I want to just be like tons of Oklahomans getting really excited about stuff. And so if we share places that are like in North Texas, well, that's where as Oklahomans I grew up going. So like that makes sense. So those are my 3 websites, and the names are strategically chosen, but they may seem a little bit bland to most people, but they're strategic. So let's dive in now into the 10 things you want to think about before you name your travel blog, so that you end up with a name that is good and also like fits what you're doing, because different names have like very different purposes, I guess I'll say. All right. Okay, so the first one, know what your blog is going to be about. If your blog is going to be about you setting off on a worldwide adventure for 2 or 3 years, not that anybody can do that this year, but if that's the point of your blog, then you may want to have it be a personal brand. Now, you don't want to copy someone else's personal brand. So like if your name is Matt, I'm sorry, Nomadic Matt is taken. If your name is Kate, Adventurous Kate is taken. If your name is Earl, Wandering Earl is taken, right? So you want, if you are the main character of your blog and the blog is about your specific adventures, then having your name in the title makes sense. However, you may not want to have it be your name. You may want it to be a personal brand, but be something that you can grow into later. So the Broke Backpacker is both the guy that runs Broke Backpacker, right? But he's not as well known as the people that use their first name. But his website can be really, really big, because anybody who is wanting to backpack can see themselves in that title. And so when they go to read that website, they're not necessarily thinking like, oh, the Broke Backpacker is a person, even though it definitely is. They can see themselves in it. It's almost like the perfect avatar for his reader. If you want your blog to be a personal brand, great. If you want your blog to be about a style of travel, then use that in the name. So, like there's luxury blogs, like I'm thinking like Fly Stay Lux is a luxury blog. There's points blogs and mile hacking blogs and solo blogs. If the main focus of the blog is going to be a destination, I would put the destination somewhere in the name. Before you pick a name, know what's going to be on your blog so that the name will match that and attract the right readers. Now you might think, well, I'm going to do an SEO blog and I don't really expect for social media to be a big part of my strategy, so it doesn't really matter. And that's true up to a point, but I think that if I have an article on what to do in Oklahoma City and my website is Oklahoma Wonders, that people are more likely to click that than maybe TripAdvisor, which they know is like generic and big. So the next thing you want to think about is you need to know how you want to make money. Now, you don't need to necessarily know at the beginning every type of avenue of income you'll ever want. And I'll link to the video here that I did on how travel bloggers make money. So you can think of it, those are 10 different income streams that I went over. And while you want to be diversified, most people are, specialists in a few and not as good in others. So if you really want to do campaigns, then your name needs to be like campaign friendly. If you really want to focus on ads and SEO, then having the words of the website name give you a little SEO boost and also be more clickable is important. So, there's just things to think about. Now, at a certain point, a blog can get so big that it doesn't matter. You can kind of still, brands will still want to work with you because you have so many case studies showing that you have so many good results. But in the beginning, it's going to be harder if your name is just really misaligned with the type of work that you want to get. All right, the next thing is, so you brainstorm some ideas, you look at your competitors, you figure out what you want, and then you go to buy it and it's taken. Well, you need to also make sure your name is available, and you should make sure it's available in a couple of different ways. So the first thing you want to do is just Google it. It might be available technically as a domain, but it might be so obviously branded something else that you're going to run into trademark issues or even just have to deal with something annoying. So I came out with my website, History Fangirl, and my podcast, the History Fangirl podcast. And then these two girls, and I don't know them, and they seem perfectly lovely, but they branded their podcast Ancient History Fangirl. Now, my website is probably much bigger than theirs, but their podcast is bigger than mine, partially because I haven't worked on mine in 2 years. But they're not in the travel space, so it's not as big of a deal. I don't get emails for them where it's Anyway, so we have just such different business worlds that it's fine. It's whatever. But I'll probably always be annoyed about it. So like just know, like if there is somebody in your industry who's using that name and it's very close and they're a lot bigger than you, it might not technically be wrong, but it might like cause you problems if you're trying to network with them, or if you ever need to collab, or like, you know, you don't need to have the most interesting, unique name ever, but don't step on someone's brand if their brand is very specific and different. All right, another thing. So after you Google it, I would Google the word, like, so if you're going to use your first name and like a word, I would Google that word and travel blog and see, you know, it's hard to like really look at it, but I would figure out, you know, like, so if let's say you want to be like adventurous anybody, right? There's Adventurous Kate and there's Adventurous Miriam and there's Young Adventurous, and they've all been blogging for over 5 to 10 years. I don't know exactly how long, but I started 5 years ago, and those were 3 blogs I read before I started. So they've been around for a long time. So if you want to be like Adventurous Samantha, well, you can be, but it's just like I think it's a weird thing to do. I think that there's more names out there in the world, and you need to just go figure something out that's not stepping on somebody else's direct brand. Now, if there's a blog that's like Undiscovered Paris, and you want to write Undiscovered New York, and Undiscovered Paris is like just a person and not like a big company, then you could probably do it. And it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, because like you're not going to be direct competitors. But if you're just doing like a global blog, then you might want to, you know, don't like straight up jack the name of your direct competitors. And that's part of why the Ancient History Fangirls bother me, but not, is like, we're not actually direct competitors in anything. It's just annoying to me personally, but whatever. I'm a very petty person, but not super petty about that, but I'm surprised how much it still bothers me 3 years later. All right, but finally, before you like buy your name, make sure that it's available on all the socials too. And the easiest way to do that is to go to Namechecker, which I'll link to in the description. They are great because it'll tell you if it's available as a .com, which you should buy the .com unless there's a good reason not to. Buy the .com. Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, if it's available on TikTok, I don't know. Snapchat. I don't know if they've added TikTok, but I haven't dived into TikTok because I'm 36 and I know I need to, but I just don't want to. That'll tell you if it's available everywhere and all at once, so you don't have to do like a million different things. Now, this is another reason why it's important to know how you want to make money, because if you want to make money and you really think that campaign work is going to be really important and you really want to use Twitter to network, then it would be important to me to make sure that Twitter is available exactly, which means your name can't be more than, I think, like 16 characters. And I think that's true for Instagram too. But like, so for me, I will go ahead and go forward with a brand if the Twitter handle is taken, but if everything else is available, because I'm not super, like, I mostly use Twitter to like retweet angry political tweets about US elections. I don't use it for business that much. So I have like my Instagram is History Fangirl, my website is History Fangirl, but my Twitter is A History Fangirl, because the girl who has History Fangirl wasn't really using it. If they're really big on Twitter, I wouldn't go ahead and get it anyway. But if they're not really big on Twitter and they just have like an account that they registered in like 2006 and never used, is that when, I don't know when Twitter started, then I would go ahead and get it, because Twitter is not personally part of my business strategy. But if it was, then I wouldn't do that. If Instagram is going to be a really important part of your strategy, then I would make sure your Instagram and your website match exactly. YouTube, exactly. If Instagram is like whatever, then you can put your Instagram account under your name. Now, should you make your travel blog your first and your last name? If you think travel writing is a way for you to get like freelance work and you eventually want to branch into other kinds of writing, and you think you're going to be more like, you want to be more like Elizabeth Gilbert and like Eat, Pray, Love, but you also want to be able to write whatever you want later, then maybe, yeah, your first and last name is fine. I think in the world of people looking for travel stuff, so if someone Googles like what to do in New York City and the name just like, you know, janesmith.com pops up, they may not click it. That may not be super clickable, but I don't have data behind that. That's just my personal guess. So I would use your first and last name if it's available, and if you think ultimately like that's where you really want to go, and this website is not going to be for you, like really about travel for that long. If you think you really want more of a lifestyle brand, then I would do that. I wouldn't do that if you really want a travel brand. Another thing to think about is you can go ahead and buy that domain and put your lifestyle stuff on there, because a lot of people like to position their travel blogs in a way where they could eventually sell it if they wanted to. And you're obviously not going to sell your website with your name. So if you think your website is all something you're going to want to sell, I would not do that. Whereas like I know it's big on YouTube and stuff, just to like whatever you talk about, just have your name as the thing, which obviously I didn't do because this is Travel Blog Coach, but maybe in the future I'll change it, but I doubt it. All right. The next thing you want to think about is don't be racist. The word gypsy is racist. I live in Eastern Europe. There are a lot of Roma here. Officially, they go by Roma and Romani people, and I'm sure in 10 or 15 years we'll figure out that that word is also technically insensitive, because I don't know how much input the community actually had, and there's lots of different bans. But essentially, if you are not a member of that community, don't use the word gypsy. If you are a Roma and you want to brand your brand gypsy, go for it. You might have some problems later with brand deals or whatever, but you can explain it to them. Like I know of a few travel blogs that have the word in them, because, you know, in the West, especially like in California and stuff, it doesn't mean a super racist thing, but it still is. You just want to make sure that the words, if you use any words that are like borderline, like gypsy, I think gypsy is straight up racist, but I know for a lot of people, it's just like, you know, Stevie Nicks and a different, you know, hippies and different era, and they're not, like, it's not in their heart that it's racist. But I've seen bloggers who are from that community, who are travel bloggers in travel blogging forums, tell people that they find it offensive and ask people not to use it. So I personally would never, I don't use the word. And I hear it a lot because of where I live, when taxi drivers like to say really awful things here, I will use the word Roma, even though it's not a common word to use in Bulgaria. So I would never use the word gypsy. The only place it appears on my website is because it's in someone else's brand name and they submitted something to me and they actually changed their brand. So I need to, which I just found out recently, they changed their brands. I actually need to go in and update that anyway to their new brand. And there's another woman who has a blog. Like, the thing is, I know the Americans that use it, like, they didn't know that it was racist, but it is. And so I really think they should change. But, like, am I going to, like, block them about it? No. But I just kind of think, like, okay, it's 2020 right now and we're in a different space. Other words that are racist, you may not know are racist. So I would Google all of the words that you plan on using and just check them if you're planning on using anything that's, like, interesting. Also, the word hobo is in some brands of very well-established people. I wouldn't tell them necessarily they should change it, but I don't think in 2020 you want to have a brand with the word hobo in it. Anything that's borderline right now, borderline offensive, that, like, you know, like, and a lot of words about being like that are about like romantic, casual, free lifestyle that a lot of travelers like to use in their brands actually come from stereotypes about different people and are very insensitive if you look at the origins of those words. So I would not use the word hobo either. Like, I know people that, I mean, I don't know them personally, but I know there are people that use them and their brands are very old. If you're starting a new brand in 2020, I would say, okay, whatever is borderline now will be considered offensive in 5 to 10 years. And you're hopefully building a brand that isn't going to die in 5 years. Like, so we'll talk later about what happens if you need to, but like, you want to future proof your brand. And part of that is don't be offensive in your brand unless it's with intent. And that intent needs to be positive. So if you're a member of those communities, I'm not talking to you. If you're a member of a community and you want to use a slang term that is offensive if someone else uses it outside your community and you want to reappropriate that in your brand, that's not what I'm talking about. You can totally do that. Like, that I'm talking about, like, white people who are not members of these minority communities using terminology that we think is just vague and that actually has like really hurtful origins, and these communities are asking us not to use. Now, I don't think I said that as eloquently as I wish I could, but that's just what I feel in my heart. And yeah, it's 2020, and I think it's time to make sure your branding isn't openly racist. But like, I can't, if you made your brand in 2010 and you don't want to change it, I can't fight you on that. This next point dovetails off of that one, but it's not exactly the same. Is I would use curse words carefully. So if you want to use a curse word in your travel name, I'm definitely not telling you not to. There are times when it really makes sense. There's a girl whose website, I don't read her website so much, but I love her Instagram, called How Not to Travel Like a Basic Bitch. And I don't have any problems with that word in real life, but I'm sure that it has affected her ability to get campaigns and different things. Her whole like business is a totally different business model from most travel bloggers. Her business is way better and cooler and more like beneficial to the world than most travel blogs. And picking that name probably did cut her off from some avenues, but probably ultimately has helped her stay like true to her mission and herself. And like, she's one of the few people that I recommend all the time. And if you're not following her on Instagram, I would follow her. But do not DM her rude things if you disagree with her stuff. Like if you go follow her, because I told you to follow her, do not DM her rude things, because people, like whenever you do kind of like anti-racist, not me, the people that do anti-racism and that kind of activism stuff, and she does it specifically in travel, get a lot of hate in their DMs. And so like, don't go follow her if you think you're just gonna be annoying. But anyway, so she's an example of someone who has a curse word in her branding. It's very intentional. She uses it for good. I think her story is that she started out using it in a different way and actually like evolved a little bit, but I just love her stuff. But like, if you just want to have a basic travel blog that makes money and you don't have like this higher purpose behind it, and you want to be able to get advertisers on it or do campaigns, and I wouldn't personally put a curse word in it. If you want to do something revolutionary, a little more radical, it's a much harder road. It's more admirable. It's a much harder road. And then you do whatever you want and use it to build a community, use it to your advantage. But if like you just want to write about your vacations to Mexico, then like that could really hurt you. All right, the next thing we want to talk about, be mindful of spellings. There are a lot of words, specifically in the travel space, annoyingly enough, like the word traveling, that are different in American English versus British, Canadian, Australian English. And if you're writing about, let's say you're writing about Germany, you go on a trip to Germany, you want to write about Germany, audience will probably be a mix of people who speak different versions of English and have different spellings. Now, I always just write for an American spelling. I kind of think Canadian spelling is garbage. I've told my Canadian podcast co-host this many times. It's something we joke about all the time. But my favorite meme is the one where George Washington's like, they're like, the British are like, what are you doing? And George Washington's like, getting rid of you, because they're dropping the letter from the spellings. But anyway, so I personally like American English. I just grew up with it. So when you create your brand, think like, is this brand going to appeal to only people who speak the kind of English that I grew up speaking, which is fine if it does, if that's your target, or is it more universal? So you can avoid this by just avoiding those words where you have to make a decision in your name. So like, you don't have to use the word traveling with 1 or 2 L's and then decide which one. You don't have to use the word favorite with a U. Like you can just find all like the 99% of words that are spelled the same in all versions of English. And also like, there's no version of English that's better than any other version of English. However, if your audience is 99% British, use British English. If your audience is 99% American, use American English. If you grew up speaking one, you can represent that one. Don't I joke about Canadian English all the time, but like, I don't actually think one version of English is better than another, especially like people can get really offensive and rude when they start talking about like the dialects of English that come from like other parts of the world. But you want to just make sure that like your readers know what you're trying to say. So if, you know, Americans and Brits use the word holidays and vacation differently, you just be intentional, like think these things through. It doesn't mean you're going to make one decision over another necessarily, but just know what you're getting into. Next one is you need to say the names out loud. Have other people say the names out loud. Introduce yourself. You're going to say it a million times. You want to make sure that you're comfortable saying it and that it's something that makes sense when said out loud. It can't be a name that only sounds good in someone's head if they read it. All right, before you buy it, look at it on your phone. Write it out on your phone and look at it on your phone. Does it look good? Teeny tiny. Does it look good squished together on Instagram? There's one name where in my head it looks like a curse word when it's all squished together. Now, the words spread out look totally fine, but all squished together, the name kind of looks offensive. And I know these people probably have no idea and I'll never tell them. All right, next you want to sleep on it. Don't actually buy it that day. I know a lot of people who have like dozens of travel blog names purchased where they own the domain and they're just sitting on them. And it's not so much a big deal that they've like wasted money or anything, but just take a breath. Once you've gone through all these exercises and you know that it's really the one you want, sleep on it. It may be that something else pops in your head in the middle of the night that is better. Not the end of the world if you set it up under one and then change it, but like why waste, you know, $10 or $15 on registering it and when you might come up with something better like the next day. So just figure out what you want and then sleep on it and then buy it the next day if it's still good. All right, earlier when I told you guys that I was going to tell you why History Fangirl originally had a different name, so I'm going to tell you that now as part of our last point. So History Fangirl originally was go324.com, and I didn't do any of these steps. It was named after, I liked the idea of 538.com, so I don't know how many of you guys know this, but 538.com was originally about counting the delegates in the Obama-Clinton primary. And there, at the time, there were 538 delegates, so that's where the name came from. And now it's just a brand name. That's where the name actually came from. And I liked that because I was like, okay, I want to go see, my original goal was to see every territory on the Traveler Century Club list. At the time, there were 324 of them. And instead of being 324.com, I just decided to go because it was travel. So I liked it and I knew why it was. But it was a weird thing to introduce myself under. Nobody else got it. And to get the website to be disassociated enough from a specific thing to where it was just a brand, it was going to have to get a lot bigger than me. And I wasn't going to get it there. So I rebranded. So I bought that website in September of 2015 and I rebranded, what is that, a year and a half? Rebranding wasn't that big of a deal. My DA, my domain authority, took a hit, but it bounced back. And if I hadn't pulled the trigger on rebranding then, I would still, 5 years later, be stuck with a name that doesn't make sense. It's not even the type of travel that I do anymore because like as much as I would love to see every place on the Traveler Century Club list, now that I'm a specialist in a couple different regions, you know, I think it's going to take me a long time to get there. And there are some places I don't know, my personal opinions about traveling to places like North Korea and Syria and the current political climate have changed to the point where I no longer feel like I would want to do that. So yeah, so that brand needed to go. Rebranding was not that big of a deal. There are some weird things like my logins and stuff are still, a lot of them are under my old account, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So if you buy something and you hate it, you can rebrand and it's not the end of the world. Find something you love, make sure it's not offensive, make sure it makes sense, make sure it makes sense to different audiences, make sure it makes sense on a tiny phone, make sure it makes sense out loud, squished together. And if you make a mistake, you pick the wrong thing, you can change it. It's not the end of the world. You'll just end up having to spend extra money on, like, I still have to pay for that old domain for the rest of my life. But other than that, it's like, so that mistake now costs me like $15 a year. Not that big of a deal. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want more travel blogging tips and tricks sent to you every week, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'm trying to post 1 to 2 videos a week. And if you have questions about travel blogging, leave it in the comments and I will make a video. I can make videos addressing your specific questions. So thanks so much for watching.